Hello, I am the token literary person here today. You heard from Brooklyn College, and I feel very much at home at Hunter, and I am going to speak a little bit about how it is that a New Yorker who is a professor of literature came to write a book on Santeria, Voodoo, and all these Afro-Caribbean religions, including, of course, Espiritismo. And it had to do exactly with being a literature professor, and which is why the comments earlier today by Anthony Stevens Arroyo were so apt. Because, as I tell my students, be a literature professor. Then you can know about history and politics and economics and of course the culture, the context of where these works were done. You have to know that if you're in literature, if you're really going to be a complete professor. And so when some years ago, we were approached by New York University to write an introductory book on these religions that fascinated students so much. The religions of Voodoo, Santeria, also known as Regla de Ocha, Espiritismo, and all these other religions, which we talk about in certain courses, but we don't really know how to explain. And so when they approached us, and when I say us, I mean Elizabeth Paravicini-Giebert, who's also Puerto Rican. She's teaching at Vassar, and both of us got our PhDs at NYU, and we thought, oh my God, that's great. NYU is coming to us to do a book, we're happy. So we thought, of course, we're academics, we can do this. And then we realized, wow, this is a very tough assignment because we are not professors of religion. How do we have the goal to write these books? But what was our motive? Our motivation was to treat these practices with respect. And we thought we could do that. We also knew that these were important not only for our students to understand Latin American and Caribbean culture, but it was important for them to understand themselves. Because how many of us that are from Puerto Rican background had an inkling of these practices in our own families and didn't understand what was happening? I would hear conversations, often hushed conversations, of people who were Espiritista, and I didn't understand why they were having contact with the dead. I didn't understand what was happening, although my mother and father were not, they were pretty much traditional Catholics. But the rest of the family, I mean, we are, the rainbow people in more ways than just color. All right. So I'm going to give a little bit of background about the creation of this work, but also what it now costs to update this text, because it came out in 2003. Things have changed in the religious practices and in the community, because part of the importance that I stressed with in terms of our students, it wasn't just the practices in the Caribbean. We also wanted to stress these practices in the diaspora. And we have to look at New York and other important cities of the United States where these practices are growing. So, as I said, we had to update the text. And we considered that to understand the Caribbean and the people of the area, religion is one of the crucial elements of the ongoing process of not only immigration, adaptation, but religion is part of this important process of understanding the community. We also saw that when we updated our book, theorizing the spiritual is also evolving. Medicine was mentioned before. I remember when we were doing the first edition, we found out that ataques de nervios were called Puerto Rican syndrome. I had no idea that Puerto Rican syndrome existed, but that some people considered that a cure for Puerto Rican syndrome was espiritismo. Well, another thing is evolving even in discussions of gender and spirituality, which has grown enormously over the years. And new approaches to pedagogy include the pedagogy of the sacred. And this one was something that really I found amazing. There's a professor at the University of Toronto in women's studies and gender studies. Her name is M. Jackie Alexander. She is from Trinidad. She is a priest of Vodou and Regla de Ocha. Very interesting. And her book, which was published in 2005 by Duke University Press, which is obviously an important publisher, asserts the value not only of traditional archival research, but of spiritual possession in writing the life of an enslaved Congolese woman in the Caribbean. This I found fascinating. This is what she says about this. All of the elements with which feminism has been preoccupied, including transnationalism, gender and sexuality, experience, history, memory, subjectivity, and justice, are contained within this metaphysic that uses spirit knowing as the mechanism of making the world intelligible. But primarily because experience has been understood in purely secular terms, and because the secular has been divested of the sacred and the spiritual divested of the political, this way of knowing is not generally believed to have the capacity to instruct feminism in the United States in any meaningful way, in spite of the work of feminist theologians and ethicists. It's a paradox that a feminism that has insisted on a politics of a historicized self has rendered that self so secularized that it has paid very little attention to the ways in which spiritual labor and spiritual knowing is primarily is community simply because it requires it. In spite of the work of Gloria Anzaldúa, Cornel West, Bell Hooks, and the more recent work of Lata Mani, Leela Fernández, and others, there's a tacit understanding that no self-respecting postmodernist would want to align herself, at least in public, with a category such as the spiritual, which appears so fixed, so unchanging, so redolent of tradition. Many, I suspect, have been forced into a spiritual closet. And I think that's actually true. I think that any discussion of the spiritual in the academy, and you also discussed that earlier, forces people into the closet. You really are not taken seriously. After I read your paper yesterday, I was reminded of an article that I read also on this topic, where people say, remember people who say no discussion of politics or religion? Well, obviously, you know, today we are not abiding by that. But they talk about misguided notions of politeness prevalent, where these kind of discussions can emerge. And one of the quotes that I saw that reminded me of this was in an article that's called Epistemological Crosstalk, Melancholia, Historical Trauma, and Spiritual Cosmology, where Daniel Coleman talks about the fact that professors are often forced to be more secular. You cannot bring spirituality into the classroom, right? You're not supposed to, okay? Whatever his or her personal set of beliefs, the professor in the secular university is by profession an atheist, committed by vocation and contract to the scientific method in its humanist variants. Such an atheism has as its task to clear the skies of the spirits that continue to haunt the academies, missions, and the outposts of the West. So this is pretty much what professors have to abide, unless you're a professor of religion, don't bring religion into the classroom. Well, one of the things we had to do in our book was recognize that we have to bring religion into the classroom. And we had to expand also the notion of who are the practitioners of these African-based religious practices. And no longer are we limited to the Caribbean diaspora. Those, and I think there's going to be a discussion today of the Mexican diaspora and the Mexican influence in New York. We had to expand the regional considerations to Mexican Americans, who we are discovering are now practicing these African-based religions. And for example, myself, who am in literature, I had to look at authors like Gloria Anzaldúa, who considers herself a daughter of Yemaya. And I thought, my goodness, here is one of the icons of Chicana literature and Mexican American culture. And she's, before her death, as a matter of fact, one of her last poems was To Yemaya. And I thought, well, this is way more than what we had seen 8 years ago. We also realized that in, for example, literature, which is what I teach at Brooklyn College, for students to analyze literature, they have to analyze literature in a profound, innate way. If you are studying somebody like Lidia Cabrera, the renowned ethnographer who wrote El Monte, which is the book of Santeria and Palo Monte practices in Cuba, but who's also a short story writer, to understand her short stories and go beyond thinking that they were just folklore and interesting language, you have to understand that when she's describing certain scenes in her short stories, she's really describing a Palo Monte tradition, a religious tradition. And how do you get to know that? You have to discuss that in the classroom. I'm just going to give you an example of one of her short stories that could lead to a naive interpretation. This one is called El Sapo Guardiero, the watchful toad, from her path-breaking book, Cuentos Negros. Now that book she first published in Paris in French, believe it or not, and then it was translated to Spanish. And that book is read by everybody as one of her ways of incorporating African African religion and language into Cuban literature. And so it's a mythical tale of twins who are the size of bird feed, who are lost in the dark forest of an evil witch, the domain of which is guarded by a toad, who protected the woods and their secret. They sleep in puddles of dead water and had not seen the light in many centuries. Now, what we call the initiated reader, an initiated reader is somebody who is aware of ritual-specific language, okay, will know that they are in a Palo Monte, the sacred wild of religious spirits and rituals. So when, for example, in the book, in the story they say, Cocuyero, give me eyes so that I may see, horror of dreams, let all tremble, I knock over la ceiba, Angulo, the seven rays, Mama Luisa, Sarabanda, jump, wooden horse, lightning, tornado. And then they go on to describe, in the muddy stomach, dust of the crossroads, earth from the cemetery dug at night, black earth from an anthill, because ants have worked doggedly, thinking neither of pain nor pleasure since the beginning of time. The bibihaguas, industrious and wise ants. The stomach of Mama Tenge, she learned her mysterious work in the roots of the grandmother Seba, in the earth's womb for 7 days. For 7 days she learned the work of silence among the fish in the river's depths. Mama Tenge drank the moon. Well, and at the bottom, On the ground, she drew arrows with ashes and sleeping serpents with smoke. This is all the description of making a palo monte enganga, okay, the famous cauldron of that religion. But if you're reading that story and you don't have that information, you are as pathetic as a person reading Nicolas Guillen's Sense Maya and not knowing that he's discussing in that poem. He's talking about a ritual, a religious ritual. And of course, when I was at NYU many, many years ago, I was told that Nicolas Guillen's poem Sense Maya is nonsense words. They mean nothing. They're the famous hitanhafuras that just sound like a ritual, an African ritual. Well, actually, no, that wasn't true. I was not well informed. That was actually a ritual he was describing there. That's something I had to find out much later. Nobody bothered telling me that. So that's what I was talking about. The importance of a professor teaching religion, teaching this literature, and understanding religion, the religious space. And that is what we talk about in our book as the initiated reader. By the initiated reader, we're talking about people who are aware of these traditions, who understand the language of the traditions. You don't have to be a practitioner or a person who is initiated, but you are, by being a part of that culture, in a certain way, an initiated reader. Somebody who understands from the inside. Somebody who can go to see Botanica by Dolores Prida and understand the language that's being discussed in Botanica. And you don't need a translation. You don't need footnotes. You're the initiated reader. If anybody has gone to see recently, by the way, Ghetto Clown with John Leguizamo, he starts off the show with practically Espiritista Pases. And so some people in that audience are getting some of that, other people are getting other parts of that. An initiated reader will understand all of it. And that's what we're professors, to have people understand all of it. Finally, I just want to say that what we call a spirited identity is the type of identity by authors like Gloria Anzaldúa, Lidia Cabrera, Rodolfo Anaya in New Mexico. Spirit is so much a part of his reality, of New Mexican reality, that we don't understand that reality. You don't understand Nuevo Mexicano culture either. And that is what we found fascinating now is the changes that have been occurring in religiosity, in this culture, in the United States, and how much that is impacting other Latino and Caribbean and Latin American peoples in other communities throughout the United States. Finally, I should say that we were very happy that for our new edition, we approached Joseph Murphy. Now, I always thought, oh my God, Joseph Murphy, what can I do? Can I ask him to write a foreword? And so Lisa said, yes, why not? He seems to be a nice kind of person. We don't know him personally, but he did write a review for our first edition, so we asked him, would you write? Oh, he was very pleased to. He's really a nice guy. So he wrote a beautiful foreword for our second edition, but he reflected on the term Creole. And since so much of our book has to do with Creolization and hybridization, etc., I think, and the creativity, I'd like to end with his definition of what it is for him. He said, for me, Creole means creative. And Creole religions are inspired constructions of symbols out of wide experience and often deep hardship. The men and women who built the Creole religions portrayed here were forced by terrible circumstance to create healing systems out of the fragments of cultural materials available to them. They responded with profound and effective medicines to survive and thrive in the brave new world of the Caribbean. Their traditions have now become world religions. As we find Rastafarians in South Africa and Babalaos in the Netherlands, All the religions featured here are in Renaissance in the United States and are being reclaimed and reimagined by people of all backgrounds. More and more Americans are finding a righteous place in Creole religious communities, places of inclusion and empowerment. Their embrace of creativity in symbol building suggests a key to understanding the future of American religiosity as borders are crossed and new communities formed. I absolutely agree. Thank you.